The Galactic Peace Summit on Terex 9 was supposed to be a grand affair, a gathering of delegates from various star systems to discuss the future of the universe. Peace, prosperity, and mutual understanding, these were the goals. All the dignitaries had arrived in the Grand Hall, taking their seats under the shimmering lights of the massive, golden dome. A gentle hum filled the air, the sound of quiet conversation from hundreds of representatives as they nervously awaited the opening speech. But the mood was far from serene. "Sire," a junior assistant whispered frantically, tugging at the sleeve of the Galactic Delegate from Earth. "There's a situation." The delegate, a seasoned diplomat named Theodore Garvey, sighed in exasperation. "Another incident?" "It was only the first day." "What is it now, Em?" It's the Earth," she stammered, her eyes wide with worry. They've made a move." Theodore paused, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean, made a move?" "It's an attack," she said. "They've launched an assault on the Majoris Dominion." Theodore blinked. His first instinct was disbelief. Earth had always been an unpredictable planet, filled with sudden political shifts, but an attack? That was something else entirely. He rubbed his temples. That can't be right. No one in Earth Command would do something that insane. "Apparently, they are," she insisted, voice trembling. "The Majoris are retaliating, and it's already escalating." The delegate's mind raced, piecing together fragments of intel. Earth had never been known for military intervention on this scale. The humans were eccentric, yes, but aggressive in their foreign policy? That wasn't their style. Or at least, it wasn't supposed to be. "Get me a communication line to Earth Command," Theodore said. His voice was cold, his face a mask of professionalism despite the internal storm brewing. Within seconds, his terminal came to life with a flashing red signal. He connected the call and found himself face-to-face with General Andrea Jansen, Earth's military leader and a former colleague from his days back on Terra. Her face was stern, the background a blur of chaos. "A battle briefing, no doubt." "Garvey," she greeted him, her tone clipped. "We've got a situation." "Indeed," Theodore replied dryly. "Care to explain the attack?" "Right to the point," Jansen said, her lips tight. "The Majoris made a move on one of our outposts on the edge of the Talaris Rim. Our response was, swift. We've deployed forces to defend the sector. But something's gone wrong. The Majoris have overreacted, and now the entire system is in turmoil." "Overreacted?" Theodore echoed, his eyes narrowing. "General, I've been to Majoris space. They don't overreact. They're strategic. There's more to this." "I'm not sure, but we have to be ready for the worst," Jansen replied. "Whatever the cause, we've got a mess on our hands." Theodore's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Earth's military intervention was rare, but the repercussions of this conflict could ripple through the entire galaxy. The Peace Summit, which he was supposed to be managing, was now at risk of falling apart. The Majoris Dominion was a powerful force, and if Earth's actions had truly provoked them, it could lead to a full-scale galactic war. And if things escalated to that point, all the carefully negotiated treaties and alliances over the centuries would be worth nothing. "General," he said, his voice hardening. "You're going to need to de-escalate this, and fast. The entire galaxy is watching. You know the stakes." "I'm working on it," she snapped. "I'll send more intel your way as soon as I have it. Just do what you can on your end. You're our diplomatic face right now." The call ended abruptly, and Theodore was left staring at the now empty screen. Earth was facing a diplomatic nightmare, and the worst part was, he had no idea how it had happened. Something was wrong, something didn't add up. "Get me a report on the Majoris Dominion," Theodore said, his voice sharper than before. "Right away, sire." As his assistant rushed off to gather the necessary information, Theodore took a long breath, trying to steady himself. The last thing the galaxy needed was Earth stumbling into a war. It had always been the humans' greatest strength that they were unpredictable, no one knew what they would do next, but now, that unpredictability was about to become their greatest weakness. This wasn't just about military strategy. It was about everything they had worked for: intergalactic peace, stability, unity. Everything. And as the summit began to formally start, with representatives taking their seats, Theodore knew one thing with certainty: this wasn't just going to be a boring series of speeches. The fate of the galaxy was hanging by a thread. And it all depended on how well he could manage the chaos that was about to unfold. The crowd in the grand hall fell silent as the opening remarks of the summit began. The lights dimmed, and the podium at the center of the hall lit up, signaling the start of the event. Theodore stood at the back of the room, staring out across the sea of dignitaries. Some of the most powerful beings in the universe were gathered here: the Andromeda Council, the Celestial Elves, the Drethian Order, and even the elusive Shard Kingdom. The situation was delicate. The Earth was, for lack of a better word, a wild card. A superpower in its own right, but also often unpredictable. The other delegates knew that. And Theodore could feel their eyes on him as the speaker, a Velter diplomat from the Alliance of Free Systems, began outlining the summit's objectives. But Theodore wasn't listening to the speaker. His mind was miles away, piecing together the information that was trickling in from Earth Command. The Majorus retaliating. Military forces deploying. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the ripple effects were already being felt across the galaxy. The Majorus Dominion wasn't just any adversary, they were a force to be reckoned with. Their technology was light years ahead of much of the galaxy's militaries, and their sheer numbers in terms of military ships were staggering. Even Earth's best forces would have difficulty holding their own for long against a full-scale assault. But what did Earth's military even think they were doing? Theodore had worked with Earth's diplomats for years, and they always preached diplomacy, not aggression. Something was clearly amiss. It wasn't like the general to act without clear orders, and Theodore was starting to suspect that this wasn't just a simple case of miscommunication. There had to be something more, a hidden agenda, or maybe someone pulling the strings from the shadows. The first major question: who gave the order for the attack? Who even had the power to make such a call without consulting the higher echelons of the United Galactic Council? And why the Majorus? Earth had always been reluctant to engage in warfare on such a scale. Before Theodore could unravel the thoughts swirling in his head, the speaker at the podium wrapped up the introductory speech. There was a brief round of applause, and the lights shifted to the next part of the summit, but Theodore barely noticed. His mind was still elsewhere, on Earth, on the Majorus, and on how in the galaxy's name he was going to make this situation disappear before the rest of the universe got involved. A sudden voice cut through his thoughts. "Delegate Garvey, we need you," a voice called from behind. Theodore turned to find a representative from the Andromeda Council, a tall, alien diplomat with silver skin and sleek, metallic hair. "Yes?" Theodore said, forcing a smile. "What can I do for you?" "The Council has convened a special session," the diplomat said. "Your presence is requested. Now, more than ever, Earth's situation must be addressed. Your reputation precedes you, Garvey, and we need your diplomatic expertise." The diplomat's words were heavy with unspoken meaning. Theodore could already guess where this conversation was going. It was time to face the music. Theodore's heart raced. The wheels were already in motion, and soon the entire summit would be aware of what was happening. The delegates would demand answers. And if Earth's reputation took a hit, it could change everything: the balance of power, the alliances between species, everything that had been carefully negotiated for centuries. It might even fracture the galaxy into factions, all at war over the perceived betrayal of one of its founding members. He gave a curt nod. "Lead the way," Theodore said. The storm was coming, and there was no running from it. The Andromeda Council's special session was held in a secluded chamber, one that had been reserved for moments of exceptional gravity. The room was dimly lit, with massive windows looking out over the bustling spaceport of Terex 9, where dozens of starships of all sizes docked and departed, oblivious to the political storm brewing inside. The hum of the engines was a constant, soothing background noise, but to Theodore Garvey, the sound felt like an ominous undertone to the tense atmosphere around him. The room was a long, oval-shaped hall, with a round table at its center. The delegates were already seated when Theodore arrived, silent, their faces a mixture of suspicion, concern, and barely hidden judgment. He could feel their eyes on him as he stepped inside, his usual confidence faltering for the briefest of moments. This was no longer just a meeting, this was a tribunal. "Theodore Garvey," a voice called from the far end of the table. It was the Lax, the tall, intimidating leader of the Andromeda Council. His body was almost entirely synthetic, his silver eyes gleaming like cold, artificial gemstones. He had been the first to welcome Earth into the fold of galactic diplomacy centuries ago, but now, his voice carried an icy edge. "The galaxy is watching," he continued, his tone measured but firm. "The Earth's actions, as reported, are deeply troubling. Explain yourself." The weight of the accusation hung in the air. Theodore took a slow breath, gathering his thoughts. He had been preparing for this moment, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the severity of it. He walked to the center of the room and faced the table. Every eye was on him, and for a brief moment, he felt as if the weight of an entire universe was bearing down upon his shoulders. "I understand your concerns," Theodore began, his voice steady, though his mind was anything but. "But let me be clear, what has happened is not the result of Earth's foreign policy. Something has gone terribly wrong, and we are working to understand what happened. General Jansen herself did not anticipate this conflict. It's a mistake." "A mistake?" Thalax's voice was sharp, disbelief written across his face. "You expect us to believe that a mistake caused the Earth to launch an assault on the Majoris Dominion? And you think this is something that can be swept under the rug with words? The Majoris are one of the most formidable forces in the galaxy. A conflict with them could fracture everything we've built here." Theodore's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Majoris. He could feel the gravity of the situation bearing down on him even harder. The Majoris were not like the other species in the galaxy. They were ruthless, militaristic, and had no patience for mistakes or diplomacy when their pride was at stake. If Earth had attacked them, even by accident, it could spark a war that would ripple across every corner of the galaxy. "The situation is complicated," Theodore replied, refusing to back down. "I'm not asking you to excuse it. What I am asking is that you give us time to sort this out. We'll send a diplomatic team to negotiate a ceasefire with the Majoris, and I will personally handle communications with their high command. But this isn't as simple as you think. You must understand," another voice cut in, this one coming from the Celestial Elves, a race known for their deep wisdom and long lives. The delegate's name was Alaris, and his eyes were full of concern, but there was no hint of anger. "If the Earth has gone to war with the Majoris, it threatens the entire peace process we've been working for. The Elven fleets have been stationed along the Talaris Rim for decades, ensuring the stability of that region. The Majoris retaliation will be swift and brutal. You cannot undo what has been done simply with words." "I agree," Theodore said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to sugarcoat the situation. I'm here to find a solution. The fact is, we have no idea how this happened, but I assure you, it wasn't intentional. The Earth has never been a military power. We're a species of diplomats, explorers, and innovators. This aggression, it doesn't fit our nature." A murmur ran through the room, and Theodore could see the doubt beginning to creep into the minds of the other delegates. He knew he was losing them. If they couldn't trust him to de-escalate this situation, there was no hope of avoiding a galactic conflict. "Is this what you're suggesting?" the Lax asked, leaning forward. "That Earth has somehow been manipulated into this? That the very foundations of your society have been compromised?" "I don't know," Theodore admitted. "But I'm beginning to suspect that someone, somewhere, has played a part in this, someone with an agenda that doesn't align with peace." The room went still at his words. Alaris and the others exchanged uneasy glances. For a moment, it felt as though the entire universe was holding its breath. "Explain," the Lax finally demanded. Theodore leaned forward, his voice lowering. Earth's military response doesn't make sense. We've never engaged in an operation of this scale without clear and unanimous approval from the highest levels of command. But this was a rash, ill-conceived attack on a highly strategic system. Something doesn't add up. I believe someone manipulated Earth's military into this conflict, and I suspect it's not a rogue general but a deeper conspiracy. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ilaris, ever the cautious one, frowned but said nothing. Are you accusing someone of planting false information? Thalax asked slowly. I'm not certain, Theodore said, his voice hardening. But if Earth was misled into thinking that an assault was justified, we need to find out who benefited from that decision. The Majoris are not a target Earth would willingly choose to provoke. Someone else must be pulling the strings. The conversation ground to a halt. The delegates exchanged whispers, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. The weight of the situation was growing, and with each passing moment, the stakes climbed higher. A few had already begun to type on their consoles, no doubt contacting their superiors, but there was nothing any of them could do at this moment except wait. I'll start an investigation immediately, Theodore continued, his mind already racing with possible leads. But I need your help. We need to work together on this, before this conflict escalates beyond control. Thalax regarded him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, at last, he nodded. We will help you, Garvey. But you are on a very tight timeline. Fail to contain this, and you risk losing more than just Earth's reputation. I understand, Theodore said, his voice resolute. I'll do whatever it takes. The meeting concluded soon after, and as the delegates filed out of the chamber, Theodore was left standing alone, his mind spinning with the gravity of what lay ahead. The galaxy was on the brink of disaster, and it was up to him to stop it. There was no more time for diplomacy or speeches. This was a race against time, and Theodore knew he would have to make decisions that could change the fate of everything. As he left the chamber, his assistant M caught up with him, her face pale. Sire, there's more, she said, almost breathless. Earth has just sent a fleet to the Majoris system. Theodore's heart sank. I don't have much time, then, he muttered. The hunt for answers would have to begin immediately, and fast. The fate of Earth, the galaxy, and everything he had worked for was in his hands. And he would need every ounce of skill, wit, and diplomacy he had to pull them back from the brink. The hours that followed were a blur of frantic planning, calls, and last-minute diplomacy. Theodore Garvey had never been under so much pressure in his entire career. His heart pounded as he paced through the labyrinth of corridors beneath Terex 9's council building, heading toward the communications room. His mind was a whirl of questions, but there was no time for answers yet, only action. Delegate Garvey, the fleet is en route to the Majoris system as we speak, M said, breathless as she caught up with him. They'll reach it in less than 3 hours. I know, Theodore replied, his voice clipped. That's why we don't have time to waste. Get me the best tactician Earth Command has. I need a strategy, and I need it now. His words were a command, not a request, and M didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel and darted toward the data room. Theodore's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening as he approached the central communications array. Earth's fleet might be heading toward a powder keg, and he had to do everything in his power to prevent the explosion. He entered the room and strode toward the central terminal, where holographic screens flickered in the dim light. A technician was already waiting for him, eyes wide with concern. The fleet's status? Theodore asked, keeping his voice low but steady. Deploying at full speed, sir, the technician replied. However, they are currently operating under a high alert state, which means there's a very real possibility that the Majoris will interpret this as an attack. Their military is known for responding with lethal force. Theodore clenched his fists. What about communication channels? Can we send them a message? We've tried, the technician replied grimly. They're jamming the frequencies. The Majoris are putting up a blockade. It's almost like they were expecting us. The realization hit him like a cold splash of water. The Majorus were not just reacting to a random attack, they had been prepared. Someone had tipped them off. Someone with access to Earth's military plans. The thought twisted in his gut. He had been right. This wasn't just a case of miscommunication, it was a calculated move. But why? Who could want war between Earth and the Majorus? The answer was elusive, slipping just beyond his reach. "We need to make contact with the Majorus," Theodore said, as he turned toward the communications panel. "Find a way, any way, to send a message. If Earth's fleet reaches that system without warning, we're looking at a galactic-scale catastrophe." Em arrived just in time with a small team of analysts. She quickly handed him a data pad. "Sire, we have a lead. One of our allies in the Majorus system sent this over." Her voice was low, as if the weight of the information pressed down on her shoulders. Theodore glanced at the screen, his mind racing. It was a decoded message, a distress signal from the Majorus High Command. The message was vague but urgent. They had detected unprecedented activity along their borders and were preparing for a massive defense. The wording was unmistakable, they were anticipating an assault, and they weren't going to wait for Earth's fleet to get any closer. "It's a trap," Theodore muttered. The Majorus weren't just defending themselves, they were preparing to retaliate. A massive military operation was already underway on their side, likely at full strength. He slammed the data pad down onto the console. "Get me an emergency channel to General Jansen. Now." A technician scrambled to comply, and within moments, the face of General Andrea Jansen appeared on the large holoscreen. Her face was a tight mask of professionalism, but the weariness in her eyes betrayed the strain of the situation. "Garvey," she said, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I assume you've seen the fleet's course?" "I've seen it," Theodore replied. "And it's a disaster. The Majorus are already preparing to retaliate in full force. You're walking straight into their crosshairs." "I know what I'm doing," Jansen snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're not going to back down. Earth's honor is at stake here." "Honor?" Theodore's voice was harsh. "What good is honor if it leads to galactic war?" "You've been misled, General. Earth didn't initiate this. Someone made sure you would attack the Majorus. Someone is manipulating us all." Jansen's expression faltered, but only for a moment. "I don't have time for conspiracy theories, Garvey. The fleet is in motion. There's no turning back now." "Listen to me," Theodore said, his voice low but insistent. "I don't care about your orders, Jansen. I care about preventing the annihilation of everything we've worked for. If Earth's fleet engages with the Majorus, it will be the beginning of the end. We need to call back the fleet, or it's over." The general was silent for a long time, her face betraying the battle she was waging within herself. Finally, she spoke. "I'll give the order. But you'd better have something concrete to back this up, Garvey. Because if you're wrong, it's not just Earth that'll pay the price." The call ended abruptly, and Theodore stared at the screen, wondering if his plea had reached Jansen. She had agreed to stand down, but would she actually give the order to retreat? The military was notoriously slow to change course once its wheels were set in motion. And with the Majorus preparing for battle, there was no time left. He said, turning to his assistant. "We need to get to the Majorus command center. I'm not taking any chances." She nodded. "Already ahead of you, sire. A transport is ready." As the transport zoomed through the atmosphere of Terex 9, Theodore's thoughts raced. He had barely managed to stop Jansen's fleet from reaching the Majorus system, but the situation was still dire. There was one more step to take, one last, desperate attempt to prevent an all-out war. He had to go to the Majorus themselves, face to face with their leaders, and negotiate a ceasefire. The Majorus were an ancient, proud race. Their military was their religion, their culture, and their identity. But Theodore had dealt with difficult leaders before. He could do this. He had to. The transport descended onto the surface of Majorus Prime, a rocky, volcanic planet where the Majorus built their sprawling cities. The air was thick with sulfur, and the atmosphere crackled with energy from the planet's active tectonic plates. It was a hostile environment, but it was also the beating heart of Majoris power. A delegation of Majoris soldiers awaited him on the landing pad, their armored figures silhouetted against the molten sky. Theodore stepped off the transport, adjusting his jacket and walking toward them with a sense of purpose. This would be no simple conversation. The Majoris did not negotiate easily. But he had one advantage: he knew their pride. "I come not as an enemy," Theodore said in perfect Majoris dialect, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I come as a diplomat, one who seeks peace. I need to speak with your leaders, urgently." The Majoris soldiers regarded him coldly, their dark eyes unreadable. Finally, one of them spoke. "Peace is a luxury, Earth Delegate. War is a necessity." The voice was deep, almost predatory. "The war you're preparing for will destroy everything," Theodore said, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "The Majoris and Earth are not enemies. But someone has made sure you think you are. You must stop this before it's too late." The Majoris soldier said nothing, only gestured for Theodore to follow. It was then that Theodore realized something: there was no simple way out of this. No neat diplomatic solution. The only way forward was to face the storm head-on and trust in his ability to turn the tide before it swallowed them all. He had been fighting a battle of words up until now, but soon, he would be fighting for the very future of the galaxy. And he wasn't going to let it slip away. The heat from Majoris Prime's molten surface radiated through the steel walls of the fortress where Theodore Garvey was led. The planet's atmosphere was harsh, corrosive, and almost unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the pressure mounting in his chest. He had barely landed, and already he could feel the gravity of what he was about to face. There was no turning back now. This would either be his greatest triumph or his undoing. The Majoris soldiers had not said much during the journey. Their eyes were unblinking, intense, and filled with an emotion Theodore had only seen in the eyes of predators. They weren't just waiting for something to happen, they were expecting it. The tension was palpable, thick as the air itself. The transport descended deeper into the volcanic tunnels, the last of the natural light fading as they entered a subterranean complex. A network of vast stone halls, carved into the very core of the planet, lay ahead, their walls covered in ancient runes and symbols. They had been here for centuries, unmoved by time or the outside world, and it was clear that their civilization was built on strength, not diplomacy. At the heart of this fortress sat the Majoris High Command, their supreme leaders, 6 in total, a council as old as the Majoris themselves. Their reputation for unyielding authority was well known, and Theodore knew this meeting would test every ounce of his resolve. "Remain silent," one of the Majoris soldiers commanded as Theodore was led into the chamber. He was ushered toward the high platform where the council sat, their figures draped in ceremonial armor, eyes glowing with a deep, unsettling fire. The air seemed to thrum with the energy of their presence. The leader of the council, Commander Zolith, was the first to speak. His voice was low, resonating through the room like a distant earthquake. "You have come, Earthling, to speak for your people. But why should we listen? Your fleet is but an echo of ours, weak, fragile, undisciplined. Your people have no place here, in the heart of the Majoris." The words cut deep, but Theodore did not flinch. He knew how to handle such disdain. He had learned the art of diplomacy in much harsher environments, and now was no different. His voice remained steady, unwavering. "I come not to demand, but to reason. There has been a grave mistake, one that could bring unimaginable destruction to both our people. A war between Earth and Majoris would ruin both our civilizations, and for what? A misunderstanding, a manipulation." Zolitha's piercing eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding? Your people have attacked us, and you believe this is a mere accident? Our fleet has been on high alert for days. You accuse us of reacting unjustly. What you fail to understand, Earthling, is that we are not like you. We do not forgive easily. We do not forget." The tension was unbearable. But Theodore remained calm. He had come this far, and now he had to convince them not just of Earth's innocence but of something far more crucial: survival. The Majorus are proud and strong. That is why Earth never sought to provoke you, Theodore said, his voice steady, though the gravity of his words hung between them. But someone else, someone with a hand in both our governments, has played us for fools. They wanted war, not just between us, but between all races of the galaxy. They sought to destroy the fragile peace we have worked so hard to build. It was never supposed to come to this. A murmur spread through the council, but Zoleth held his ground. Do you suggest that we are pawns? That we, the Majorus, are being manipulated by an external force? Why should we believe this? You have no proof. Theodore took a deep breath. I know this sounds improbable. But I have evidence, circumstantial though it may be. The data gathered from Earth's fleet's movements, intercepted communications, and the strategic positioning of both our forces, it all leads back to one central figure. Zoletha's cold gaze intensified. And who, Earthling, would you accuse? The one who gains from this conflict, Theodore replied, his voice quiet but forceful. A faction within the Galactic Trade Syndicate. They stand to profit from galactic chaos. This war would serve as the perfect opportunity for them to monopolize trade routes, destabilize economies, and crush all rivals. A deep silence descended on the chamber. The Majorus leaders exchanged glances, their armored faces unreadable. Theodore could see the seeds of doubt being planted in their minds. But he knew this moment was crucial. He had to act quickly, before the doubt could turn into suspicion or worse, aggression. Think, Commander Zoleth, Theodore urged, stepping forward. The Syndicate's influence has reached into every corner of the galaxy. It's not just a business, they've infiltrated political structures, military strategies. They control the flow of information. We have been blinded by their deception, all of us. I may not have concrete proof, but I know this: Earth's fleet never would have engaged in such a conflict without being manipulated. And the Majorus. I know you would not start a war without cause. You value strength, but you also value order. This war serves neither. For a long moment, Zoleth said nothing. The silence was deafening, and Theodore could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. The other leaders were still, but their eyes flickered with thought, doubt, and something deeper, fear. Finally, Zoleth stood, his movements deliberate and slow. If what you say is true, Earthling, then we have been played. And the cost of our mistake will be more than just lives, it will be our honor. We cannot stand by and let this injustice continue. But we will not be the aggressors. You must prove your words. You must prove that this war can be avoided. Theodore's pulse quickened. What do you want me to do? Zoletha's eyes flickered with a sudden fire. You will present this evidence to our highest council. You will show them that this war benefits no one but our enemies. And you will make them see that peace is the only path forward. If you fail, Garvey, Earth will pay the price. Not just with blood, but with the very essence of its being. A chill ran down Theodore's spine. He had no choice. This was his last chance. If he failed now, there would be no turning back. He had no concrete proof of the Syndicate's involvement, no undeniable evidence to lay before the Majorus High Command. All he had was trust in his instincts and the strength of his words. For what felt like an eternity, Zoleth and the council studied him, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Zoleth spoke, his voice low but resolute. You have 1 hour. You will present your case to the council. If they are convinced, we will stand down and seek peace. If not, he paused, his gaze cold and unwavering. Then prepare for the full wrath of the Majorus. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Theodore as he was escorted to the council chamber. There, in front of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, he would either succeed or fail. There was no middle ground. But as the doors opened and the High Council seats came into view, Theodore squared his shoulders and took a deep breath. He would not fail. He couldn't. With a final glance back at the darkened corridor, where the Majorus soldiers stood silent and watchful, Theodore Garvey stepped forward, toward the greatest gamble of his life. He would present his case, and he would make them see the truth. He had no other choice. 1 hour later, in the cold and cavernous hall of the Majorus High Command, Theodore Garvey stood tall before the council once more. As he began to speak, his voice unwavering and filled with conviction, he realized something. The universe had not been waiting for this moment. But it was waiting now, waiting to see if one man, one human, could turn the tide. This time, however, it wasn't just about survival. It was about hope.